Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Couple of Nukes. As always, I'm your host, Mr. Whiskey, and today we're going to talk about something that I love to talk about, which is it's never too late in life to start. Sometimes we bounce around in life. I myself have worked a lot of jobs despite my youthful and beautiful appearance. I've had, different journeys of going from one place to another until finding my calling. It's not always we wake up or our parents just hand it to us, right? Sometimes we got to figure out the hard way. Sometimes it costs us more money than we'd like and more hardship, but eventually we get where we're supposed to be. And I think it's inspirational. I've had authors as old as in their 70s, 80s, and I know people in their 90s publishing their first book. So it's never too late to write and publish your book. I think that's so beautiful that have gotten to interview so many people who are making that effort later in life. And we have one such person here today to also talk about sometimes what we end up falling into isn't what we thought. And I definitely can relate to that. Speaking on stage and performing comedy was not what I, came out of the womb thinking about. So we're going to get into it today with Mr. Stockham, Michael Stockham. So great to have you here. And we got a lot to cover. So let's go ahead and just start with a basic overview of who you are.
Sure, good. Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate you letting me visit with your audience today. It's a blessing. You want to start with just a general overview of where I am and how I got here?
Yes, sir.
Absolutely. So, yesterday was my 56th birthday. So, I am old and gray to a certain extent, as my children like to tell me, but I'm not as old as others, I guess. I'm currently a lawyer at a large law firm. We have about 2,100 lawyers throughout the United States. It's a big enterprise, what they call big law or white shoe law, some people derogatorily say. But I did not start out to be a lawyer. In fact, when I first left high school, I went off to be a studio artist and studied that for a while. Then I ultimately got a bachelor's degree in writing poetry in the creative writing department at the University of New Mexico. And then I went fishing for 9 months and was a fly fishing guide in northern New Mexico, living out of a fifth wheel trailer,
Hmm.
taking people fishing every day. After about 9 months of doing that, I went back to school, and sometimes I joke I doubled down on dumb. I got a second degree in writing, creative writing, and one in short stories, and then ended up wandering back to New Mexico, where I fell into a number of odd jobs, anything from a mason's apprentice to a dishwasher at a restaurant to a server, technical writer. I was a telemarketer for a long time for MCI WorldCom when that was still a business, selling long distance. And then I ultimately decided to go back to school one last time and see if I could put together a profession. And I did. I went to law school. I graduated out of Cornell in 2002. And I've been basically at the same firm practicing law as a litigator and doing sort of corporate crisis work for almost 2.5 decades now. And that's kind of where I am professionally. And part of that journey also has included taking a path a little bit different and starting to write novels later in my life and getting back to those original creative writing roots.
No, I can't say with 100% confidence because I've had, over 300 guests, but I think you're the first fly fisherman I've ever had on the show. That's not something you hear commonly or often. So we'll get to that because I'm sure there's stories with that. But I got to start with I've published two collections of poetry. I love poetry. I used to write a lot of it, not as much anymore. And I ask this with a sincere heart. What was going through your mind when you said, I'm going to get a degree in poetry? And I don't mean that derogatorily, but what were you thinking when you were like, hey, I want to pursue a degree in poetry? What is the degree going to enable you to do in terms of writing poetry that just going out and being a freelancer or just creating a brand and platform by yourself would do?
Correct. So at that time, the vision would have been probably twofold: to become a regularly published poet, put out collections, et cetera, and then try to work your way into academia and teach at the college level in a creative writing
Okay.
department. So it would have been something looking to be a professor or a lecturer at a university level would have been the dream at that point.
And was teaching a passion, or was it just, hey, this is the best way to get paid for poetry?
A little bit of both. If you're going to undertake something unique like that, like being a studio artist or being a short fiction writer or a poet, you're going to need to find some way to pay the bills. And the pathway forward professionally, when you went down that path, seemed to be teaching. And teaching was a
Okay.
passion. I enjoyed working with students when I got the chance. I have been an instructor when I worked my way through graduate school and other stuff. I did teach English composition and some other courses and found that enjoyable. I enjoyed very much getting people to help them learn.
And was it just seeing their stories come to life or their passion for it as well, or, getting to be kind of a part of their creative journey?
The most inspirational part of it is seeing somebody find a style that fits them.
Mm.
So when someone jumps from being a copycat or just following in the footsteps of a poet that they admire and takes on their own voice, either in poetry, short fiction, or novel writing, that's really rewarding. That's really interesting to see. And it's a fun journey to go on with someone. So it would have been a rewarding career as well. It would not have been as lucrative for sure, but it would have been rewarding.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if I could do it because I'll be honest, here's my confession. I just don't really like poetry that doesn't rhyme. I hate it, to be honest. And for me, I always say if it doesn't rhyme, it's not worth the time. And of course, that's not true. There's a lot of great poetry that doesn't rhyme, and it's not to mock or knock anyone's, personal style, but I just can't do it. I can't read it. I can't write it. I
Yeah.
love to have the rhyme. There's a certain flow that it creates to it for me compared to the structure of non-rhyming poetry. And a lot of the poetry that I consume rhymes. And so I have to ask you, do you have a favorite poet or a poet that inspired you? Like, what got you into poetry? Did you just, come out of the womb saying, maybe saying a poem to your mother when you were born, or was it later in life that you kind of found someone who inspired you?
I found so originally all of the passion was directed towards studio art and sculpture and painting and that kind of thing.
Mm.
And then I got more involved in creative writing workshops, going to coffee houses when I was younger and listening to open mics and poets and other people doing stuff. And they were interesting to me. And then I started studying a little bit more. It's not so much, I mean, I think rhyming is a great thing. I think there are lots of wonderful poets that rhymed very, very well. And well, William Shakespeare, of course, and the sonnets. So things last forever in all different formats. I think my favorite poet is probably William Carlos Williams. He's a little bit of an inspiration, even for me now, because he was a practicing physician and he wrote during the small breaks in time that he would get during the day. And in fact, oftentimes, or one of the reasons that his poems towards the end of his career got shorter and shorter was he was composing those poems on a prescription pad. And if you've ever been in a doctor's office, those are not very large pieces of paper. So he would try to capture an image as quickly as he could, as succinctly as he could, in as few words as he could. He was a member of a group called the Imagists. And that's both inspiring, one, because he was a professional like I am, and it's hard to find time for art. But also, I read his poems, especially his shorter poems, as sort of a window into how to describe things in fiction even more eloquently and directly in the least or fewest number of words.
Mm. Yeah, that is interesting. I know I've consumed a few different poets myself, and it's always interesting to see their styles because there are some poets I've read that their poems are 20 pages long. The opposite end
Yeah,
is you've got some really long form. And, I actually interviewed Peter Gunn, is a modern day writer of epic poetry with a specific goal of feminism in mind, because a lot of epic poetry came from a time period where there weren't a lot of, female heroes as the protagonists of the story. So if you want to check out, Peter Gunn does some modern day epic poetry, which you don't see a lot
wow.
of people consuming anymore. So it's great to meet all these poets. And I gotta ask, if you do you perform ever? Do you go to the read alouds or anything like that?
I do not anymore. I do not. I do a lot of, if I'm up talking with a microphone, it's generally discussing things like the Texas Business Court or breaches of fiduciary duty or internal investigations to groups of corporate directors and executives. So I don't really do the coffee houses as much anymore, but maybe when I get a little bit older. I'm my grandmother died at 105 and my dad's currently 92. So hopefully
You
I'll
got
have as
time.
long an arc as that, and I'll have a chance to go back to the coffee houses when I get maybe a little bit older and grayer.
Right after you write your book, Confessions of an Accidental Fly Fisherman Tour Guide. Yeah,
I may go
so
back to doing that too. We'll see. My wife may not want me to, but it was a lot of fun.
yeah, so how did you get into that? Was it just fishing was a hobby you enjoyed, or you were just looking for work and that happened to be what was around?
I started fly fishing. Well, I started fishing very young with my father. At the time I was growing up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, you could still get your driver's license at 15 and a
Wow.
learner's permit at 14 and a half. So at 15 years old, I was let loose into the wilds of New Mexico with a fishing rod, a tent, and no supervision. I would just tell my dad when I was going to get back. And this was before cell phones or anything like that. So I'd disappear for 24, 72 hours into the Jemez Wilderness or the Santa Fe Wilderness and deal with that and go fishing. And it just became a passion. And later, when I got older, I had the opportunity to be a fishing instructor, a fly fishing instructor at a private camp. So I built a program for them over several years, and then that naturally just morphed into offers to fly fish for groups either in the wilderness, like northern New Mexico, or I did spend 90 days on Little Cayman, which is a 8 square mile island in the middle of the Caribbean, chasing bonefish, permit, and other type of trophies.
And for anyone listening who doesn't know what fly fishing is, we're not fishing for flies, like quite literally. It's a style of fishing. I just got to clarify that for anyone who's never heard of it, and that's
That's right.
crazy to think that at 14 and a half you could get a learner's permit because I was in the bar here in Japan the other night and I met this couple from Finland and they were just like flabbergasted at, the idea of they're like, you can get a driver's license or like at least a permit when you're 16 in the States or whatever. Because their contradiction was they were like, how could you not drink at 16 but you can drive? And because I think I don't know the drinking age in Finland, but a lot of the European countries and other countries in the
Yeah.
world, it's much lower. It's at least like 18 or lower. So they're like, you can't drink until you're 21. Because they said 18. I said, no, it's 21 now. And they were just mind blown. They're like, but you can drive as a teenager? They're just like thinking that's crazy. So to hear it even
Yep.
lower, 14 and a half, I mean, I think about where I was with that, that's kind of crazy. But so you bounce around on a couple other jobs. How did that affect you in terms of identity and purpose? Did it kind of wear you down, or you knew you were in the journey of shaping that? Like, how did it affect you inside?
Well, probably two different eras. When I was younger, it was a lot more fun. I mean, Rolling Stone gathers no moss. So I would go do whatever I wanted to and really didn't have any responsibilities other than myself. Then I met my wife, or I had known her for a very long time. We'd known each other since middle school, basically. We got married, and then things started to become a little bit more serious, meaning I knew we were going to start a family and have kids and do all kinds of things like that. And it was going to be difficult to have sort of a wandering life bouncing from job to job and raise a
Right.
family. That was the big change for me, was just growing a little bit older and taking on the normal responsibilities that adults do. I wanted to be a traditional father. My wife wanted to be we wanted a traditional family with one breadwinner and one raising the kids. And so it was going to take a different profession than what I was engaged in at the time to do that. So we undertook that adventure and went to upstate New York and lived in the snow for 3 years, which is always overwhelming if you're from a desert.
Yeah.
And then we came back. We moved to Dallas, and we've been here ever since.
Not only that, but me being from New Jersey, born and raised, the snow in that area turns like black and gray after 2.5 days. So it's
It's
gross, you know. I mean, it's great to have kids there because they love the snow, they play in it. But as a grown man who has to shovel the snow, it's not great. You know, your back
it is
hurts, your
not.
knees hurts. Yeah.
It is not. I did explain it to some of my friends who asked, it's so beautiful, it's so nice, it's so fluffy. And I said, well, it is, but here's an analogy for you. Anytime that you need to go get, say you forgot a quart of milk and you need to go get it from the grocery store, I want you to take out your vacuum and vacuum in your entire house before you can even get in the car and leave. And then you will understand how much effort it takes to shovel all the snow away from a vehicle three or, 2 or 3 times a day to get out for just a basic errand.
Oh yeah, it's bad, and it's gotten worse since I left home. You know, my parents call me now, and they're like, "We got a foot and a half today," and I'm like, "A foot and a half of snow." When I was growing up, like it was only, you maybe got like 6 to 10 inches at most, maybe, and most of the time you only got 2 to 4 inches. Now it's just, I don't know, world's changing. They get like a foot and a half at a time, and I'm like, man, and. It's nothing though. I'm part of a Canadian church group, and they send me pictures of like 3 to 4 feet of snow, just the stop signs buried, and they're like, "You need to stop complaining," But
Yeah.
yeah, I moved down south, and interestingly enough, I moved down south and it starts snowing down south. Like it snowed in Georgia and
Ah,
Florida last year and this year. It's like it's chasing me from New Jersey. Well, all the people from New York and New Jersey moving down south are bringing the snow with them, I guess. So it's like we said, it's fun when you're a kid, but growing up there, especially if you're coming from a desert climate, can be an adjustment for
oh
sure.
yeah.
Learning
Yeah.
that it gets to people don't realize the Northeast coast, it gets to like -4, -10 degrees in the winter. It gets a lot colder than people think, so not
Oh, it
enjoyable
does
at
get
all.
miserable. Yeah, it
Mm.
does. Where did you move in Florida?
Well, I moved now to Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay, great town.
Yeah,
The
so
home
it's
and birthplace of Leonard Skinner.
it's in it gets a little bit of snow now, but not too much. And it unlike see the thing with Georgia and Florida is unlike New Jersey and New York, the snow is gone by the end of the day. It
Oh
just
yeah,
it shovels itself, right? It melts.
it
So
does.
that would be nice if after our kids played in it and we took our pictures and stuff, if it all just went away, then I'd say, hey, let's move back up north. But it doesn't work quite that way. Now, what I want to address because you had gotten 2 degrees, both of them in the creative writing field and stuff like that. But why, what was holding you up, or what seemed to be the issue with getting a job with them? Was it the market just didn't have open spots for those kind of degrees? Was it people weren't hiring? Was it like what was the issue? I mean, 2 degrees, that's a lot of money, that's a lot of education, a lot of time and
Mhm.
effort. What was the misalignment there?
Well, I think it's twofold. One is, if you go in marketing, you can go total addressable market, right? How many jobs are there in universities across the United States for teaching creative writing?
Right.
So it's a limited pool. And then the second part of it was that most of the people that were teaching or in those positions were
Stay there.
tenured and they were going to stay there for a very long time until, not even after retirement age. They were going to stay there until the universities told them that they were retired and that they needed to go. And so there just wasn't as much opportunity to do that as I thought there would be. And it became a little bit more difficult. When I moved back to Albuquerque, New Mexico, my hometown, part of the problem there was that because of the national labs and all of the scientists there, everybody's spouse has a PhD in something, usually in English or something. So
Mm,
even for basic grammar courses or teaching English composition, I was up against individuals who had more credentials and had 10, 15, 20 years of teaching experience for every job position I was trying to fill. So it just became more difficult. And then I decided I was going to do something else. I wanted to be a welder, and I was in at the vocational school learning how to weld. And I ran out of money, went by a restaurant, and the guy said, "Yeah, you can have a job, but everybody has to work 2 lunches." And I said, "Well, I'm in school welding." And he goes, "No, well, you're going to have to choose, be a welder or basically eat." So I chose to survive
mm.
and waited tables for a while and then found other jobs And then, like I said, I decided to go to law school.
Yeah, welding is the huge industry, and restaurant wise, I've worked at a few restaurants, and I'm sure you've had your fair share of there's so much drama for no reason at restaurants with the wait staff, the cooking, the people, and all that. So yeah, but one perk I will say is I most of the restaurants I worked at, you did get a free meal or you got discounted meals, but if you're the only one in the kitchen, I'm not
That's
confessing
right.
anything, not on trial, but yeah, I've enjoyed my fair share of restaurants, but usually it's the opposite of your story. Every time I've worked at a restaurant, it was because of flexibility, of wanting
All right.
to work at a restaurant that was like, hey, you can take off whatever days you need or work whatever hours you need. So sorry to hear about that, but it ultimately pushed you towards pursuing law. You call yourself an accidental lawyer because it wasn't your intention. What about when you
Correct.
decided to go back to school for a third degree? Did you kind of have a pep talk with yourself like, all right, third time's the charm, so to speak. We really got to pick something. Why law? Why not, get something to triple down on teaching or to go into a different kind of industry or vocation? Why did lawyering call to you?
So it seemed a little bit of a natural progression because there's a lot of writing in law. So it was going to be a different type of writing, but it was something that I already knew I was proficient at and that I enjoyed doing. I also had spent a lot of time, I'd spent a long time bouncing around, struggling financially and other stuff for a while. So yeah, I won't lie, it sounds superficial, but it's a lucrative profession. It's a well-paid profession. Lots of lawyers make a good living, and it just seemed to be a little bit more steady, provide a little bit better life for my family, and it just seemed like a natural path at the time that I undertook it. I didn't really have any doubts about it. It just sort of became providence, if you will, that it was something I wanted to do. It was going to happen, and it was going to turn out positive for my wife and I.
Not to really get that perspective of the outcome and the benefits, but looking at it up front, was it a bit intimidating to say, hey, this particular profession is also going to be the most schooling and the most money compared to any other vocation? Or did you say, hey, whatever we got to do now to get that long-term benefit?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. Maybe, the I had essentially with my career, my educational career, I had ruled out any science pathway, right? I wasn't going to be an engineer, wasn't going to end up being a doctor, not without redoing even oodles more education than I wanted to do. So it was something I could do, something that I was proficient at, something that I knew that I could succeed at. And then there is just the practicality of it. When you look around, when you start doing job fairs or going through books on professions, et cetera, it is hard to beat lawyering for the reward, if you will, from a financial aspect. Now, there's a lot of stress in it. You work a lot of long hours. You spend a lot of vacations with your family out at the beach or in the pool, and you're in front of a laptop working or doing a Zoom call now or a hearing. But those are sacrifices you make, and over a career, it all seems to balance out a little bit.
And was there a particular type of law that you wanted to pursue more than other in terms of like criminal defense or whatever other types there are?
Yeah, so there, when you go through, I mean, you really sort of pick between two veins of law, if you will, other than being a professor, which I knew I didn't want to do that. So you really if you break it out into two halves, it's transactional versus trial law litigation. So you're either going to be in a courtroom or in a boardroom helping putting together deals as a corporate lawyer or tax strategies for corporations, for transactions, tax efficient things like that. Real estate lawyers deal a lot with transactions on buildings and financing. Finance lawyers do that as well. So there's sort of that transactional business side of law or the trial side of law where you're going to end up being in a courtroom, either civilly or criminally. So you're either going to be a prosecutor or a defense attorney or representing a plaintiff or a defendant in a lawsuit. And I chose trial law because I wanted to be in a courtroom. I still had an innate love and fondness for telling stories. And that's really all a trial is. is trying to figure out your side of what happened, your facts, and tell them the best you can in the most memorable way, which is nothing more than a story to 12 or 14 people sitting in a jury box.
Mm. Yeah, I totally get that. I know for me, I guess I have a morality conflict of, for me, if someone is guilty and I'm being paid to prove they're innocent, for me that's a moral conflict. So I don't think I could do law because people always told me you should be a lawyer. You're good at speaking, you're good at writing, you're good at reading and, persuasion and really looking at facts and loopholes. And I was like, for me, there's a morality conflict, and I guess there's other types of law I could go into, but
Yeah,
I get I I'm on the path I'm on. And I think I'm going to stick on that, and
good.
maybe in my 30s and 40s, if for some reason this isn't working, I might accidentally become a lawyer as well, and I'll use you as my inspiration. I'll keep your website in a lanyard printed out, and I'll be like, he did it. I can do it too. But
You're
so
always welcome to
do,
call or email.
Yeah, thank you. And then how did that turn out? Obviously went through the schooling and everything and it went great. And then when you got to the world of court and law, was it different than you imagined? Was it a bit more stressful, a bit more shocking, a bit more demanding, or did you find it actually to be easier than you anticipated?
It was different in a couple of ways. This these days, if you're not in criminal law or doing certain types of trials, then you really, most cases settle these days because the cost of a lawsuit is so extreme that businesses
Yeah.
oftentimes, if you're going to do business litigation, then you're going to end up, most 95% of those cases settle. So you don't spend a whole lot of time in the courtroom. You spend a lot of time doing other things, writing, researching, arguing through briefs, counseling. So as I've gotten older and moved on from being an associate to a junior partner and then a senior partner, equity partner in a firm, your job duties morph and you become more of a strategic advisor for corporations. You become someone that helps during times of crisis or conflict. Companies go into bankruptcy or they get attacked for securities cases, or there's all kinds of different conflict that comes up. And so you spend a lot of time helping people navigate through very difficult situations. And that I really enjoy, that my career has kind of turned into that. And so I don't really plan on retiring anytime soon in the near future. It's not like I want to get out of the profession or I hate doing what I do. I love what I do and will probably stick around for a while, for a long while, another 15 or 20 years until I decide what to do with my next chapter.
No pun intended as an author, of course. Now, is there a particular niche that you'd like to serve? Is it like small mom and pop shops? Is it like a certain type of corporation, or it's kind of whatever gets thrown your way?
Do a lot of work in what I call government facing, so defense from state or federal government against a corporation or an individual, usually accused of fraud or some sort of financial shenanigans. And then also, I do a lot of advising at the board level. So, public company boards or private equity companies that have boards of directors and executives trying to put together large strategic operations or strategic planning, defenses, that kind of thing. So, I wouldn't say it's all Fortune 500 company stuff, but usually I'm involved with the corporate side of stuff as a business touches on litigation or defense against the government.
Okay. Now, at what point during your career as a lawyer did you decide, hey, I have time and purpose and passion to pursue writing while also doing lawyering?
That genesis rests in the sort of the beginnings of COVID, right?
Mm,
Everything shut down for so long. People got shut in their house. The business of law was still going on full blast, but you needed something to take away the stir craziness because otherwise it was just being in the same place all day, working all the time. So I began thinking about writing, speaking, doing things of that sort. I met some people, found a mentor and coach, and just started working on it. And ultimately, I think what we decided was that I really wanted to be a novelist. It was something that I've always wanted to pursue, even when I was doing poetry and short stories. And so we started rowing the boat in that direction.
Yeah, so I want to focus on specifically your book, Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer. Can you
Sure.
tell us about that?
That is a book that comes, it when you read the cover or the inside flap, it does say that, it's inspired by actual events. And some of that is, it is took a lot of creative license in it. So it's not 100% autobiographical, but it deals with two different sections of life. One is I was appointed by a federal judge to represent a prisoner who was in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, and he had been litigating a case against a prison for not providing him with proper medication for several years. And ultimately, that case broke free and was set for trial. And there was no way for Edwin, the name of the prisoner, there was no way for Edwin to prepare for trial or do witnesses. So they appointed myself and one of my friends, David Schulte, who's also been a lawyer with me here for about 25 years. And at very young lawyers, probably our third year of being lawyers, we marched up to Wichita Falls, Texas, and tried this case in federal court for Edwin. And then there's the second story, which is my wife and my journey to have a second child and sort of all the stresses that come from family life of trying to go through IVF to try to have that second kid and all the different things that come to bear. And when I had them written out essentially as two different stories, and my mentor, Aurora Winter, who's a wonderful woman, suggested that we just take a little more creative license and interweave or interleaf chapters of the two stories together and put them on one chronological timeline and make it all one novel. And so we did. And that's the genesis of Confessions of an Accidental Lawyer.
Mm. I have to say, it's a really hard thing when it comes to the prisons. I've actually done episodes with formerly incarcerated persons and other people working in government to make changes because of the neglect of medical health, mental health, especially, and all the services that are supposed to be provided to prisoners or should be provided to prisoners, really, and aren't. Every prison is obviously different. I've interviewed people from multiple different prisons, including federal prison, and hearing kind of their stories. And it's really sad to see. We talk a lot about reformation on this show because they are
Yeah.
people. Prison is supposed to be a place of change, ultimately, right? It's supposed to be not just quote a punishment, but it's supposed to be a transitionary time into a new place in life. It's supposed to be a path of redemption, right? That's why we do it. And unfortunately, we see a lot of them just the return rate is high because they aren't set up properly in prison with resources or medical services, especially on the mental health side, to get you reacclimated to to career, to society, or whatever it is. A lot of them I've interviewed people that get dropped off out of prison with a $20 Uber gift card and they're like, all right, enjoy your life. And they have no connections, no friends, no money, no education, or all
Yep.
they know is life in the slammer, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of reformation that needs to be had. And so to hear about that. That's a side of lawyerism that we don't hear much of. Fighting for prisoners' rights is really important, and it can be very difficult, as you describe on the book cover, if I'm not mistaken, prison-friendly town. And I think Texas in general is a much more prison-friendly area compared to some other places. So that makes it a lot harder to even win those cases when there's societal or localized biasing going into it as well, which is maybe one thing I'm interested if you want to address it all. Have you
Sure.
found in the world of law a lot of biasing, a lot of unfair opinions or people weighing evidence more or less because of biasing, whether that was the judge or the jury side or based on the area or maybe the company's reputation rather than what actually happened?
Surprisingly, no. And you would
Mm.
think that the answer would be yes, but take it from two different aspects. One is judges. Most judges that either, I mean, we elect state court judges here in Texas or are appointed in other states or to the federal bench. They really do want to try to get it right. They want to get to the right answer. they may not understand your argument or they may not buy your argument or whatever, but I don't know that their decisions are oftentimes driven by bias. I can think of only one trial where I thought I had a judge that was trying to drive a result specifically by
Mm,
rulings in order to get to what he thought the what his preconceived outcome was. So that's not as common as you would think. And then juries are just average, regular old people. I mean, they come from all walks of life. And something amazing happens in the jury room. I've had the privilege of watching a lot of mock juries through two pane
right.
window, two-sided glass or one-way glass, if you will. And to watch them deliberate, they really take the evidence seriously. They take the instructions from the judge seriously. They debate. So I think there's sort of a conception out there that's maybe driven by Hollywood a little bit, that
100%. Yeah.
juries can railroad people. And maybe that's true in a lot for some types of cases or in some localities at some time. But in general, I think juries get it right. They take the job seriously and they work very hard because they're invested by the time they get the case. You know, they've spent a few days there to a few weeks listening to all the information. And when they're finally let loose to go deliberate, they really want to do a good job. So I don't find that much bias in the practice of law, not as much as you would think.
Mm. Yeah, I think what it is, you kind of hit on it, is with social media, mainstream media, the one that's going to trend the most is one that is seemingly biased or had an issue, and everyone's going to share that one, and it represents, unfortunately, the world of law. So I think that's the case with most things, right? They're taken out of context. Context is so important, and social media is a highlight generator, right? It's a pick and choose kind of platform. So I think that's what we've seen a lot
Yeah.
of. And then of course I don't know what to call them really, but the TV judges, the TV courtroom shows that are, I mean, I've seen some that are just so unprofessional or so definitely wouldn't, if it was real court, you wouldn't be talking that way or have those kinds of results. And,
Right.
it's not the full, like you're talking about, these people are spending weeks on cases. And some of these ones, it's like, all right, this is the first time seeing the evidence, 30 minutes, your side, my side. I'm going to throw in a bunch of jokes as the judge that are not appropriate at all. And we're going to call it a day. So I think, yeah, people definitely have a twisted view of it. So the biasing aside, then what have you found to be the worst part of all this? Because obviously you've had great success. You've had time to write
Mhm.
novels. You've had time to climb out of the financial hole that your life led into to bless your family and your wife and children with great stuff and yourself and find purpose and identity. But that's not without hardship and sacrifice, as you mentioned. Outside of the time and work demand, what have you found to be maybe the least rewarding part, or even a part that's takes away from you?
I think the hardest part is probably the stress because you do take on oftentimes, and even if in civil law, if it's a corporate lawsuit or whatnot, you're dealing with human beings oftentimes at a very difficult time, if not the worst time of their life.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of stress that comes with the responsibility of taking on a case for someone. There's also a lot of stress that comes just from onboarding, if you will, other people's anxieties about their particular situation. If you're any sort of a human being at all, you become very invested in these cases. You know, one modification to the idea of biases, and you were talking about social media. On the other side of the courtroom, you know, the advocates themselves, the lawyers, they are biased because they're zealously advocating for their client. They believe in their client's case. They want to win. So there's a lot of competition there. And then you see it in a lot of court cases that pick up a lot of TV coverage or become sensationalized in the media. And then you see people outside of the courtroom forming up into teams. There's team this person, team that person, and sometimes there's
Right.
protests and angst and anger there. Not so much in the courtroom when those jurors are there, but on the outside, there's a lot of that conflict.
Yeah.
So the stress of it is difficult. You know, you work a lot, especially when you're a young lawyer. It's just like any profession, everybody pays their dues. And so you end up dedicating an awful lot of your time as a young professional to the firm. I think I've told young associates that come on that, you know, the firm's probably going to want somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 hours of your time per year to get started. Now, and all that's not client work or billing work, but they're if you want to build a profession and you want to be known in the area, then you're going to need to get out and go to business lunches. You're going to need to go out and go to the bar association events, go out to company and corporate events. And so you spend a lot of time doing that as well. And as you pile on, as you get older, if you have a family and kids and others, then it's sort of the demand of time that takes over. And that's the most difficult thing to figure out how to balance. And that's the thing that starts to grind on you over time.
And then what I want to address, because the show is focused on recovery, so we're talking about this burden of other people's lives in your hands. Like you said, your best days or operate on other people's worst days, trying to fix their situation. For some of them, their business is falling apart, their life is maybe going to be going to prison, right? You got all these different things you're dealing with as a lawyer. How do you handle that stress? How do you, obviously for every lawyer it's different, but for you personally, was writing your outlet or was it something else? And or is it just, hey, I did everything I could do and it's out of my hands? Like, how do you deal with those feelings of responsibility, accountability, of being burdened and stressed?
It's difficult to do. It is, you try to catch rejuvenation where you can. You try to get as much sleep as you can. You try to make sure that you try to pay attention or be present is a better way to say it. When you go to dinner with friends or something, or you go out for the weekend with your kids, you try not to drag as much of work with you as you can, both either physically or mentally. You need to be
Mm,
present in the
mm.
moment with the people that are that you love and enjoy, because that's rejuvenating. A lot of people don't successfully navigate it. Professions like dentists, doctors, lawyers, they have some of the highest rates of drug use, alcoholism.
Oh yeah.
They're famous for not eating well or taking care of themselves, finding time for basic self-care, going to church, eating right, things like that. So you try the best you can, and then I think you give yourself a lot of grace, because it's really easy to be self-critical. All of us are more, our hardest critic is between our ears. So you do have to back away a little bit and realize that you're trying to do the best you can with what you got on your plate right now. And that's tough. That's tough because there's always a lot going on. Everybody knows that.
For sure. I think especially the hardest thing you're talking about, like being at dinner and not checking your emails or your phone or thinking
Sure.
about the case. I think that's hard. I mean, even for me, I'm bad at looking at emails and doing work stuff, trying to fit it into anywhere I can instead of saying, hey, this is my dedicated time off. And I think, there's a bit of solopreneurism to being a lawyer in a degree that, there's a lot that you handle on your own or that you're responsible
Hmm.
for. So, you had that high work drive of let me do what I can when I can and not taking the time properly rejuvenate, like you said. And I definitely have talked to a lot of doctors, lawyers, and the likes who have fallen into drug use to deal with this stress in the time. And that's unfortunate. Now, we mentioned your first book, but you have a series that you've been working on, Jake Fox, and there's the two books coming out, and I'm excited to talk about that and get everyone ready in anticipation for that. How long have you been working on that series and kind of the inspiration behind that?
Right. So the inspiration a little bit comes from Confessions, the original book, because it was, somewhat inspired by true events. Those books are very hard to write because you need to be creative to make it interesting, but you also feel tethered somewhat to reality and the history of what
Right.
actually happened. So I decided to do something completely different and just make up everything, make up my own world, my own
Mm.
town, all that. And that was somewhat freeing. So that was part of it. And then I'm a big fan of redemption stories of people that are completely broken and then try to build their self back up. And that's kind of the story. It's Jake Fox is a big time lawyer who goes through an extreme personal tragedy and heads back to his own small town in northern Texas to try to rebuild, and finds himself, even though he just wants to practice small town law and just do simple things, he finds himself suddenly defending a teenager who's accused of murdering her father in a high stakes trial.
Wow. And when it came to this series, the name Jake Fox, what was the inspiration behind that? Because I know as an author, when it comes to naming the book, that is vital, that is pivotal. It's hard. You have a list of all these names. Sometimes, hey, sometimes I was like, I had it right away. I'm like, this is the name. And then other times it's been like, nothing is sitting right. So Jake Fox, just using the character's name as the title, what was the power behind that?
Some of it's inspirational, some of it's commercial, right? So when you start thinking about writing a series or you're going to do something of a project that's of a longer arc, because it's really conceived of as 9 novels. So it will go on for a while. And then it's, well, how are you going to get somebody interested in it? Some of it's an inspiration from other people. I mean, you look around and see what other very successful authors have done. And, James Patterson is a big example of that. He's been he's the most successful author living, I think. And he started off with Alex Cross. And then it's an Alex Cross mystery or Alex Cross this. And then there's a subtitle to most of those books. So I somewhat took that format because it made commercial sense to me. So the first 3 books are Jake Fox Ties That Blind, which is out, Jake Fox Don't Forsake Me, which is coming, and then the third one is in pre-production right now, and that's Jake Fox The Rest of the Wicked. And those are all conceived as essentially 3 trilogies. So three sets of 3 books makes 9, and that just seemed to me to be kind of a easy round number and something that I could work on over time.
And each book is Jake Fox dealing with a different law case. Is that correct?
To a certain extent. So the first one deals with Rose's murder trial, but then it continues on into books 2 and 3 with the same characters on the same sort of arc. So it's a continuation of the story,
Mm.
even though that particular trial is done. And then, as I have it currently conceived, the next 2 trilogies will involve many of the same, if not all the same characters, plus some new ones on a different particular main story thread, if you will. But each book has to stand on its own. Each book's plot has to work as a novel, and then you try to build it into 3 books into a trilogy, so it's all one big story for 3 novels in a
Mm.
row.
Right. Well, I'm actually a fan of, and I know everyone has different styles. There's been plenty of standalone single books that I loved, but there's also many series where I've really loved watching the characters grow, over
Mhm.
time and really getting the slowed down and detailed reading. And I know that's not for everyone. Some people prefer, hey, we've spent so much time getting to know the characters. I feel like a lot hasn't happened. But for me, I love that, really seeing their inner, talk to themselves, how the character relationship dynamic changes. And when you find a good book series, you don't want it to end sometimes. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you're like, what is this author doing? But sometimes they're like 12 books. Like I'm excited to dive in that. So it sounds like with this, you're really gonna see Jake Fox's character change either good or bad, up and down, and I think that's really realistic
Correct.
of life, of course. And definitely I think it'll give us some lawyer insight that you don't see. It's compared to someone writing about a lawyer who's just nowadays asking ChatGPT, does a lawyer do this? Is this part of their job? I think it's definitely going to have some accuracy to it that really immerses us into that. So you've got the first 3. So where are you at? Are the rest already kind of done and you're just waiting for publication time, or you're slowly making your way through? Do you have the bare bones outline and now it's just getting those chapters done? What's that process looking like right now?
Yeah, that is so it is not all done. The old adage, how do you eat an elephant? 1 teaspoon at a time. That's how we're working on it. And, I have my day job with all of its responsibilities. I still am a husband. Both my kids are grown up, but I spend a lot of time with them. So you have to make time for art if it's something you're interested in. It's something I've always come back to. So I try to get to it as much as I can when I can, with as much emphasis and inspiration as I can. So the one is done. Like I said, the other one is significantly done. And then the third one's in pre-production where we're outlining it right now. And we'll just go forward as we see the best we can, because that's all anybody could do. Is, like I said, you got to give yourself some grace. It's easy to feel behind in a project when you forget that you have all these other demands on your time. And so you just, like I said, a little bit of grace goes a long way.
For sure. I totally understand that, and I think the biggest pressure is usually ourselves. Like my book, God versus the Dominant Human Spirit, was supposed to be out a while ago. And so many life events popped up that were not, pre-scheduled into my writing timeline that, I've
Sure.
gotten behind on that. And it's been hard because I'm like, you always want it out as soon as possible. I want to get it out and I want to promote it and I want to make impact and I want to, but no one's really ultimately demanding it to be out now except for yourself, and I've had to learn like, hey, it's gonna get out, not everyone's gonna die tomorrow and be like, ah, that book, I never got to read it, so there is definitely is grace, but and I know not just with the timeline, but being a perfectionist as well, a lot of authors delay their manuscript inevitably. I know just going through and editing it and
Sure.
rereading it and editing it again and again and again just to death. And I think, we need to show ourselves a little bit of grace. And then have you struggled with, I know many authors, myself included, you're working on the Jake Fox series, you're dedicated to it, then an idea slips in your head for a different series or a different book, and you're like,
Sure.
oh, I want to work on that, but I got to finish this, or what, how is that creative process going?
It goes. I mean, new ideas come all the time, even splinter or spin-off works from these characters. It'd be fun to take some of these characters on their own and do something else. So, you know, you do it the best you can. You try to stay motivated, and it's a project, so you have to stay focused, but you can't let self-drive turn into being a self-critic to the point that it's a detriment.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah.
Well, and according to your genetic calculations, you have almost half a century of writing time left to go. So that's plenty of
Even
time to
more
write
than
a few
that,
more
yeah.
book series. Yeah.
Yeah, if I
And
retire at the age of 75, I've got 25 more years to go. So I'm not in any huge rush, but I would like to move the projects forward.
yeah, and then as far as obviously as authors, we want everyone to read our book, but would you say there's a particular niche or person who would enjoy the book more than any other?
I think people that like thrillers or legal thrillers would enjoy the book. I also think people that like characters would enjoy the book. That's one of my inspirational things. I like to draw as deep a character as I can. It's not
Mm.
just about the plot of the book, it's about the people and how they transform over it. And so that I think people would enjoy greatly. If you like characters, if you like thrillers, especially something like a John Grisham legal thriller or somebody like that, you probably would like Jake Fox.
Yeah, like I said, I really like the character development. And then when you say thriller, in terms of like law books like this, or where there's a element of law involved in it, is it kind of like a just the stakes are high or there's a psychological suspense to it? Like, how does thriller play into it?
Well, it's not, a lot of people think of thrillers as sort of horror movies or something like that, that's all about jump scares or twists coming. But to me, a thriller is all about pacing, meaning that the book
Mm.
moves quickly. There are twists and turns and surprises, etc., and unique things, but it needs to move, and it's got to be such that the reader doesn't want to put it down because of the pacing of the book. It's not something where you're just kind of wallowing around enjoying the pastoral descriptions or something like that. So it's a little bit different from a lot of other fiction, but they are consumed. A lot of people love thrillers. They pass time, they get engaged with the characters, etc.
For sure. Now, as we wrap up here, what would be your main takeaway for everyone, whether it's about jumping around jobs and finding your purpose, or if it's about, getting that story inside of you out? What would you want everyone to really reflect on as we leave this conversation?
Well, I don't think anybody should leave behind a dream of something that they want to do, whether it's writing a novel or doing something else. If you want to learn to fly fish and you've never done it before and you're 65 years old, go do it, or play golf or something. If if the desire to do something was spoken into you and you cannot shake it no matter how many years you ignore it, then you probably ought to go do it. And don't let inertia or self-doubt keep you from pursuing something that could be very rewarding. Because, like I said, if you keep circling back to it, then it probably has meaning somewhere deep in your soul to you, and you should embrace that.
I agree 100%. So, Mr. Stockman, great to have you here today. I
Yeah,
know that you got a lot more books in you. So, once all nine of those three sets of trilogies are out, definitely want to have a conversation with you to see how it feels. My
yeah.
theory is that you're going to sit down, we're going to say, is it a relief? Is it a celebration? You're going to say, well, I've got a different nine-book series I started. I think
That
that's
is
how it's going to
exactly the
be.
way it's going to work.
Yeah.
That is the
So,
way it's going to work. Absolutely.
right. No, where they say no rest for the wicked, but really it's no rest for the writers. That's
That is right.
gonna
There's
be
always
mine.
another poem or a
Yeah.
book to write.
Yeah, but thank you for what you do, for helping those
Sure.
corporations who are facing some of the most difficult times and then taking care of your family and trying to create it. Because ultimately, the writing isn't just about serving entertainment, it's about education and impact through fictional writing. We know that
Right.
fiction is deeply embodied with reality in it, and stuff from whether it's from law trials in real life to pregnancy mishaps to hardships. These are all real things, just fictional characters and settings, but these are all real things. So I encourage everyone, whatever you're reading, take stuff out of it. It's not just for entertainment. Yes, it can be entertaining, but there's a deep lesson to be learned. So thank you for what you're contributing to us.
Well, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to visit with me. And it's been a blessing to be here. Anytime you want to have a conversation, I'd love to do it.